So Hare Krishna, everybody.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
I'm just going to start by reading the invocation. Om Gyana Timarandasha Jananjanan Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Sva Padantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalan Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvahutam Purijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karano Sinho Dino Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Taptakanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavanishvare Vrishabhanu Suti Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatrubhascha Kripa Sindhya Evacha Patitanan Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasade Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today we're going to go over the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. A very interesting chapter. Krishna is speaking this chapter to Arjuna, and it's a very deep chapter, and there's many different levels. So on one level, he's explaining to Arjuna some of the principles of one of the steps of the process of Astanga Yoga. Because Arjuna, in the beginning, when he was looking at the opposing army and became overwhelmed with compassion, and he actually told Arjuna, he said, it's better I live in this world by begging. It's better I become a mendicant and go to the forest and perform austerities than to engage in this in warfare. And Krishna is actually speaking Bhagavad Gita to for one reason, to remove him from the bodily concept of life, to instill in him a sense of duty, and to understand the importance and significance of engaging in devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and to understand how engaging in such service in the right consciousness frees one from the results of all activities. So in the 6th chapter, Krishna is throwing some light on this process of Astanga Yoga or Dhyana Yoga, and revealing to Arjuna that it's actually a little impractical. And you'll see in this chapter, Arjuna, he's actually going to reject that process. But there's some very interesting verses in this chapter, because Srila Prabhupada explained that some of these principles explained in this chapter, and some of these principles of yoga, are applicable to all different types of yoga, which includes Bhakti yoga. So we're going to examine some of those verses. So in the beginning, Krishna is explaining how the importance of controlling the mind in yoga. And so in the 5th verse of this chapter, Krishna describes a man must elevate himself by his own mind, not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and the enemy as well. And the 6th verse, he says, for him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his very mind will be the greatest enemy. And text 7, for one who has conquered the mind, the supersoul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. To such a man, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. And then in the 8th verse, a person is said to be established in self-realization and is called a yogi or mystic when he is fully satisfied by virtue of acquired knowledge and realization. Such a person is situated in transcendence and is self-controlled. He sees everything, whether it be pebbles, stones, or gold, as the same. And the ninth verse, a person is said to be still further advanced when he regards all, the honest well-wisher, friends, enemies, the envious, the pious, the sinner, and those who are indifferent and impartial with an equal mind. So here Krishna is explaining the result of actually having a controlled mind that's fixed in the absolute. So you can imagine that state of consciousness where um, whether you see pebbles or you see gold, it has the same value for you. In one place, in one of our great scriptures, Srimad Bhagavatam, it refers to gold as yellow stool. So in one sense, gold, it's just a mineral. But in this world, people become completely obsessed and possessed with the idea of possessing gold and wealth. And that greed to possess that wealth drives people to perform all kinds of fruitive activities, and sometimes to perform fruitive activities in very low modes of material nature in very nefarious ways, which are detrimental and harmful to others. And by such activities, those individuals pursuing wealth in that way actually implicate themselves very deeply in karma. So Krishna is explaining for one who is actually situated in yoga. And so yoga actually means to link with the Supreme. So one who's actually linked with the Supreme in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, his satisfaction comes from within. So he doesn't require gold or money or facilities to make him happy, because his happiness simply comes from the fact that to explain it very simply, he's in love with Krishna, and that's the source of his satisfaction. So, but to come to that stage, it requires a lot of austerity. Even in the process of Bhakti Yoga, it requires a lot of purification. So therefore here Krishna is stressing how one must elevate himself with the use of the mind and not degrade himself. And he says the mind is the friend and the enemy as well. So by understanding the science of Bhagavad Gita, we can learn to link our mind in connection with Krishna and in connection with the desires of Krishna. And that is done by the process of Bhakti Yoga, engaging in devotional service. And we'll describe that later in this chapter. But it's a very important part of all forms of yoga. And we all have those experiences where our mind may be in many different places at one time. I know my wife and I teach a lot of communication courses through Grahastas, and we always explore with individuals how, when they're communicating with others, you might be listening to someone, but at the same time you're listening to that person express his point of view, your mind can be completely going on a different tangent, thinking of your point of view and thinking how you're going to defeat their point of view. So that's not really communication. That's a symptom of an uncontrolled mind. So yoga means mind control. And one of our acharyas, Srila Rupa Goswami, he describes some activities that are very conducive and very essential to developing loving devotional service. And two of those are to reveal your mind in confidence and hear in confidence. And that actually requires a lot of self-control and mind control, in that when we're actually listening to someone, we have to take our point of view and imagine we put it down on the table and let go of that fear that we're going to lose our point of view by listening to the other person. But we can listen to the other person. And similarly, they can take their point of view and put it aside. We can pick up our point of view and explain it to them, and we can fully understand each other. And on that platform of mutual understanding, um, even though we can totally disagree on what we're discussing, we can respect each other and we can love each other. And so that is actually the spiritual platform. It's one of mutual respect and appreciation. And, and again, that's achieved by a type of mind control in which we can actually learn to listen properly to others with respect and compassion. And so Krishna's talking about that kind of mind control here, how we have to realize that um, in some ways our mind is conducive to spiritual life if we engage it properly, and if we let it um, control us, it can be very detrimental to spiritual life. So that's a very important lesson we can take away from this sixth chapter. And there's also some very important verses also. Text 24 in this chapter. Krishna's talking about the importance of determination. And he says one should engage oneself in the practice of yoga with undeviating determination and faith. One should abandon, without exception, all material desires born of false ego, and thus control all senses on all sides by the mind. I'll just read part of this purport. The yoga practitioner should be determined and should patiently prosecute the practice without deviation. One should be sure of success at the end and pursue this course with great perseverance, not becoming discouraged if there is any delay in the attainment of success. Success is sure for the rigid practitioner. Regarding Bhakti Yoga, Rupa Goswami says, the process of yoga can be executed successfully with full-hearted enthusiasm, perseverance, and determination by following the prescribed duties in association of devotees and by engaging completely in activities of goodness. So here Prabhupada is explaining the importance of having that determined mentality and how to execute that by executing devotional service in the association of devotees and understanding the mode of goodness. And if you recall, actually you won't recall unless you've read Bhagavad Gita, because it's in the 14th chapter, Krishna is going to discuss the modes of material nature. And there he describes how there's three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And they're continually pulling at us in different ways. And those modes of material nature will affect us until we are on a liberated platform. And so Srila Prabhupada, he describes in the 14th chapter that Krishna, his nature is of pure unalloyed goodness. It's called Shuddha Sattva. And that if we want to associate with Krishna directly, we have to attain also that nature of pure goodness. And he explains in the 14th chapter that by practice, one can develop the mode of goodness. And so again, that practice, it involves controlling the mind and trying to understand what are the activities and thoughts and desires that we should strive for to be in the mode of goodness. So here, again, Srila Prabhupada, he is saying that we can attain success by engaging in that devotional service, by engaging completely in activities of goodness. So part of the mind control we were talking about is understanding what it means to be in the mode of goodness. There's a very interesting example of how we can become affected by the modes of material nature in the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's an incarnation of Krishna, Lord Kapiladev is explaining the process of yoga to his mother. And he describes also how the modes of material nature are acting. And he describes that one can even be worshiping the deity of the Lord, but if he is envious of others at the same time, the Lord says he can never please me by his devotional service. So that would be devotional service in the mode of ignorance. So it's devotional service in the sense you're worshiping the deity, And eventually you become purified because you are worshiping the deity, but it's very detrimental to your progress that you're possessed of a spirit of envy towards others. And that's going to be very much like an anchor, which is going to slow down your progress in devotional service. So therefore, again, this mind control is important to learn to identify um, when we enter into the mode of ignorance. And it's described also in the 14th chapter how these modes manifest in all activities, in eating and sleeping, in many different ways. And we can all examine, I'm sure everyone here chants japa, and you can experience how sometimes the modes of material nature can affect how you're chanting. So if you're chanting and you're falling asleep, that's probably pretty obviously you're getting a little infected by the mode of ignorance. And if you're chanting and your mind is thinking of all the innumerable things you have to do today and all the world politics and all the world conspiracies, and you're thinking about that while you're chanting, that's pretty much the mode of passion. And if you can just control your mind and simply chant and hear, that immediately brings you to the mode of goodness. And Prabhupada described once that simply by chanting, one at once transcends the sensual, the mental, and the intellectual platform. It takes you to the platform of goodness. And if we really chant purely with devotion, pure goodness. So it can be very helpful in our devotional service to examine how these modes are affecting us and what we can do with our mind to control our mind and our activities to elevate ourselves more to the goodness. And that way our mind becomes our friend. And as Krishna said, for one whose mind is controlled, the super soul is already reached. So Srila Prabhupada, one time he said that, he said, Krishna, he is wanting to talk to you, but you don't want to hear. You can't hear because you actually don't want to hear. So if we can actually come to that mode of goodness, learn to control our mind, understand how to extricate ourselves from the lower modes of material nature, we can eventually come to be in tune with that pure mode of goodness and actually understand the dictations of Krishna. And so also in this verse, Prabhupada is describing this great determination. And we see how that was exemplified so much in life of Srila Prabhupada. He received instruction on his first meeting with the spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, to spread Krishna consciousness and the message of Lord Chaitanya in English to the Western world. And Prabhupada was amazed at that first meeting that he was told to do that. And Srila Prabhupada said he was so impressed by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he immediately accepted Srila Bhaktisiddhanta as his guru. And he always thought of that instruction, how he could spread Krishna consciousness in the English language to others and how we could go to the Western world. And Srila Prabhupada did that at a very advanced age. And he came to America at the age of 70 years old with the equivalent of 40 rupees and a box of Srimad Bhagavatams. And he actually described when he got off the boat in the harbor in the US, Srila Prabhupada said he didn't know whether to turn left or right. And he just said, my dear Lord Krishna, I have no idea why you brought me here. I have no idea if these Western people will accept your message, but somehow you brought me here. And Srila Prabhupada, he prayed, just let me be your puppet and make me dance according to your will. So Prabhupada was so much dependent and so much fixed on that order he received from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And we see how he achieved such amazing results as a result of that dedication and bhakti. And that was like the paramount pinnacle of mind control and determination. I mean, you could imagine if any one of us were to, I don't know if anyone's ever been to New York here in the Bowery. I was there in 1978, I think. And not a nice place, not a nice place. And every city has place we call Skid Row, which was basically what the Bowery was. So you could imagine going to a place like that alone with practically no money, and you're going to try start some kind of major religious movement. Um, it's like inconceivable. But Srila Prabhupada, he described that his feeling at that time was that I'm here on the order of my spiritual master, and this is my home. So when you think of home, you're sitting in your comfy couches and relaxing, and it's warm. And Prabhupada's situation was not like that. It was the Bowery. He literally didn't know where he was going to be from one day to the next. Um, but he had that great determination, and he was so fixed in devotional service, so fixed in pure goodness. And Prabhupada gives one example in this purport of how at one time there was a very small sparrow that laid its eggs on the shore of the ocean. And a great wave came and swept away the eggs. And this little sparrow said to the ocean, well, if you don't return my eggs, I'm going to dry you up. So this little bird with his beak was taking little beakfuls of the ocean water and dropping it somewhere else in the hope it was going to dry up the ocean. So that seems a bit ludicrous to have a determination like that. But it's described Garuda, who's the feathered carrier of Lord Vishnu, saw the plight of this little bird and came down and said, my dear ocean, if you don't return those eggs, I will take up the task. And immediately the ocean returned the eggs. So in that way, we see how Srila Prabhupada, he was so determined, hope against hope, to establish Krishna consciousness, how Krishna sent him so many sincere devotees to help and gave him so much facility. And so we cannot imitate that, but we can follow in the footsteps and try to develop that sincere determination and try to come to that mode of goodness. And our God sister, Mother Jamuna, she used to say, sometimes we experience this thing called Krishna magic, that when we try very sincerely to serve Krishna, amazing things can happen. So that's one way Krishna can manifest in our life if we try to practically understand how to apply these teachings in our life. So this is not just a philosophy we're trying to memorize and just ace some exam, but we're trying to understand how we can take different parts of this philosophy that resonate with us and actually apply them practically in our lives. The next verse I wanted to talk about was text text 30. It's very interesting. And again, this is the result of actually coming to the point of yoga, of union with God. And Krishna says, for one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me. So Srila Prabhupada comments here, a person in Krishna consciousness certainly sees Lord Krishna everywhere. He sees everything in Krishna. Such a person may appear to see all separate manifestations of the material nature, but in each and every instance, he is conscious of Krishna, knowing that everything is the manifestation of Krishna's energy. Nothing can exist without Krishna, and Krishna is the Lord of everything. This is the basic principle of Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is the development of love of Krishna, a position transcendental even to material liberation. It is the stage beyond self-realization, at which the devotee becomes one with Krishna, in the sense that Krishna becomes everything for the devotee, and the devotee becomes full in loving Krishna. So that's a very special, very deep understanding. So in the process of Astanga Yoga, one is trying to attain Krishna by his personal austerities and endeavors. But in the process of Bhakti Yoga, one is trying to attain Krishna through loving service. And and the Supreme Lord reciprocates. I met this very interesting gentleman in about 1975. I met him on many different occasions, and I ran into once in 1975, and he told me he was going to join a Buddhist monastery. And he told me, he said, I've always been inspired by the Hare Krishnas, but I'm going to go to Japan and join a Buddhist monastery. And I never saw him again until about I think it was about 1998 or 1999. I happened to run into him at a Rath Yatra, and he'd become a devotee. And he told me he had tried all these different types of yoga, meditation, austerity, and Sufi, and Buddhism. And he said he finally came to the realization one can never attain the absolute without divine grace. And he realized all these other processes, he was trying to do it by his own endeavor. And then he finally, after all that effort and trials and tribulation, he came to this conclusion that it's only by some divine reciprocation, by some divine intervention, that one can actually get this real essence of self-realization, which Srila Prabhupada describes here as actually love for Krishna. And so that is the essence of the process, and the result of controlling the mind and being determined is that we can actually develop this mood of love for Krishna. And from this verse, we see that one who has this consciousness, he sees Krishna everywhere. Everything reminds him of Krishna. And Prabhupada gave one example once of, said, just like a young boy and a young girl fall in love, and they are not straining their minds to think of each other. It's spontaneous. So in the same way, when one is actually blessed through the process of devotional service with this pure love of God, his or her mind will just spontaneously think of Krishna and be absorbed in Krishna. And so that, again, is the result of that practice of austerity, of controlling the mind and senses and fixing the mind on Krishna and trying to overcome the lower modes of material nature and develop this loving service attitude. And eventually that fructifies in this pure love of Krishna. So that's the result of yoga. And again, Krishna is explaining this in the context of this Astanga yoga, which involves going to a secluded place and meditating and alone. Sometimes we think yoga today in terms of going to some big room somewhere with a bunch of people with yoga mats and doing hatha yoga. So that's a kind of yoga. But Prabhupada said real yoga means you're in complete seclusion, alone in the forest. I'm sitting on a deer skin and meditating day and night. That's the kind of yoga that Krishna's talking about in this chapter. So Arjuna, he's hearing this, and Arjuna's conclusion is, I'll read it to you. Arjuna said, "O Madhusudana, the system of yoga which you have summarized appears impractical and unendurable to me, for the mind is restless and unsteady." And then Arjuna says, "For the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, O Krishna. And to subdue it, it seems to me, more difficult than controlling the mind." So again, Krishna's talking about going to some secluded place and trying to meditate, and Arjuna's trying to envision that. And he says, forget it, it's impossible. For several years before my wife and I found Srila Prabhupada's movement, we were doing yoga and meditation, and I used to get up in the middle of the night and meditate. We were living on this very isolated place on Vancouver Island on a point of land. There was water on three sides. So I would get up in the middle of the night and be completely quiet, dead quiet, and I'd try and meditate. And then I'd be meditating for some time. And then, I don't know if you've been on the ocean shore, sometimes you can hear tugboats like 10 miles away. So I'd be trying to meditate and I could hear this low vibration of a tugboat just like penetrating my consciousness, disturbing the meditation. So that's why Arjuna is saying, forget it, Krishna, this is not possible. And then what Krishna says next is significant. Krishna says, O mighty Arn, son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly difficult to curb the restless mind. So Krishna's agreeing. He says, yeah, Arjuna, it's tough. It's tough. But Krishna says, it is possible by constant practice and detachment. And then Krishna says, for one whose mind is unbridled, self-realization is difficult work. But for he whose mind is controlled and who strives by right means, he is assured of success. And Srila Prabhupada, he comments in the purport to these verses that what Krishna is referring to by the practice is these different practices of devotional service, of hearing, chanting, serving, remembering, surrendering to the Lord. And Srila Prabhupada said, he said, especially the process of hearing is the most important. And Prabhupada describes how when you hear about Krishna, the mind becomes gradually attracted to Krishna. And the more the mind becomes attracted to Krishna, the more the mind becomes detached from all those things that are pulling us away from him. So that is the essential, most important practice in the process of devotional service, is to simply chant the holy names, also to read Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, because you get this exposure to Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada, he was describing once that even you're reading Bhagavatam, you see the Devanagari, the Sanskrit verses, and even you try to read the translation of the verses, and it seems like a foreign language. But Prabhupada said, no. Prabhupada would say that this is a sound vibration which has been imported from the spiritual world. And he said it's to chant these verses, Prabhupada said, is very powerful and very important. And he was giving a class once, and he was encouraging the devotees to chant the Sanskrit mantras. And this was very early in the movement, and many devotees were having a hard time, so they were shy to chant. And Prabhupada was encouraging them to chant. He said, just chant. And he said, even if you don't understand the language of the mantra, he said, these mantras are so powerful that you become purified just by chanting them, because it's sound vibration, he said, imported from the spiritual world. And then Srila Prabhupada said in a very strong voice, he said, even if you do not understand the English, he said, simply because you try to understand Krishna, he said, Krishna will take you back to Godhead. So simply that effort to try to understand can greatly and in powerful ways facilitate one's advancement in devotional service. And so that facility is there for all of us. And Prabhupada also mentioned sometimes, we may say, well, Krishna spoke this 5,000 years ago to his personal friend Arjuna, who was very highly qualified prince, extremely powerful personality, great warrior. And how can we compare to that? And we're separated by 5,000 years from when Krishna spoke that. But Srila Prabhupada, he responded by saying that if we read Bhagavad Gita, try to understand and try to follow in the footsteps of Arjuna, he said we can attain the same result as Arjuna. So that facility is actually there for all of us in these sacred books, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, in chanting the Maha Mantra. It can help us access that transcendental platform. And the end of this chapter Krishna explains, like, what is the absolute essence? And it's the last verse, 47, and Krishna says, and of all yogis, he who always abides in me with great faith, worshiping me in transcendental loving service, is most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. So that is actually the essence, is to abide in Krishna, just to think of Krishna, to feel that love for Krishna. Twice in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, always think of me and become my devotee. I was just reading this interesting book Shivaram Swami had compiled um, from the works of many different great Vaishnava acharyas, and he was describing Uddhava, who was the last person to see Krishna before Krishna left the planet. And when he last saw Krishna, told him to simply become absorbed in him, simply become absorbed in Krishna. And he told him, go to the Himalayas and you'll see Narnarayan Rishi there and tell him what I told you. And it's described that when Uddhava was leaving Krishna, he was walking away. And he said within his mind, he heard Krishna say something. And he said it was the same thing that he had discussed with Arjuna. There was something that Krishna had told Arjuna many times. And that was to always think of Krishna and become Krishna's devotee. As simple as that, just to think of Krishna and become his devotee. So that is actually that's the essence we want to extract. There's some interesting instructions given in the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam about the potency of the process of Bhakti Yoga, its importance and its essence in terms of the social structure of what Vedic society was. And sometimes we hear about Varnashram in Vedic society. And there it's described that even within Varnashram, even in the social system of social and spiritual orders, that one can engage in so many activities, but if one's activities don't evoke this attraction for hearing about Krishna, this love for Krishna, and it's described that all one's activities, they really don't amount to anything. You miss the whole point. So the whole point is to develop this love for Krishna and to really seek out things within the Shastra, within Srila Prabhupada's books, within his purports that resonate with you, that you can hold close to your heart, that can help you to control that, the lower self with the higher self. So you can think of Krishna, so you can realize when you're slipping into the modes of passion and ignorance and elevate yourself to the mode of goodness. And in that way, we practice this yoga of learning to fix our mind on Krishna and develop that ultimate goal, which is simply boiled to the essence, is develop this sense of loving attraction for Krishna and his devotees. So I'll end there. And if anyone has any questions or comments or realizations, well, I'll take them at this point.
I have a question. You said that we should follow. Is the sound weird?
You have a little bit of an echo. I think I can hear you.
It wasn't there before. Anyway, I'll ask my question and then there won't be any more echo. How do we follow in the footsteps of Arjuna, who was such a great soul? We can't even come near.
Well, Prabhupada said once, we have to follow in the footsteps, but be careful not to imitate.
Right.
We cannot imitate, but we can be inspired by their example. Prabhupada was speaking once about one great Vaishnava Acharya who he'd reduced his eating. He was so absorbed in Krishna, he slept only 1 or 2 hours a night, and the rest of the time he was just completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness and writing Krishna conscious literature, associating with advanced devotees. And it's described sometimes he would forget to eat and sleep. And it's described he would simply eat a little bit of buttermilk every day. And so Prabhupada said, you cannot imitate that. You cannot imitate that. But he said, but from these example of some devotees who's very advanced, who just practically subsisted on a very small amount of food, he said, we can understand that it's better to eat a little bit less than a little bit more. Just that, take that principle away from that example of to eat a little bit less than a little bit more. And Prabhupada must have seen something, because he said in that lecture, he said, not that you hide in the closet and eat 6 samosas. So he must have opened the door somewhere and there was a brahmachari in a closet with a bunch of samosas. So Prabhupada said, that's not yoga. So we just be a little self-controlled and understand those principles. It's better to eat a little less, to be moderate. Krishna actually says in the Bhagavad Gita, one should be moderate and balanced in his activities of eating and sleeping and recreation and work, to have that balance, because there's no way we can imitate those acharyas, but we need to understand the principle.
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Prabhu, that must be samosa yoga, Prabhu.
What's that?
I said that must be samosa yoga.
Samosa.
Prabhu, I have a question.
Yes.
And it's just my personal self, and I may not come out right, but I'm taking the liberty to be bold here.
So you're thinking that?
I have the full conviction that any proximity to Krishna is the best space to be.
Mm-hmm.
Any progress in that direction makes me feel more comfortable and more at ease.
Mm-hmm.
But when we are praying in front of the deities or doing the japas, and I have to be honest, I don't do it as frequently as I should. I'm trying to make a habit to do, 1 or 2 rounds in the morning every day nowadays. And so many thoughts come in your mind, and that's kind of like, and I personally feel, that's kind of like my thoughts are being purified at that time while I'm doing the japas. And sometimes we have sort of envy and, being in the material world, and so we have that full sense of conviction. And then I just have a personal conversation with Krishna that please take that anomaly from my mind. And maybe I go to bed and I think tomorrow will be a better day. And then I get drifted back into the world. And I know I need practice, but I don't know. I mean, it's just such minimalistic progress, and sometimes it's negative in nature as well. So it's kind of like, even in spite of the fact that that conviction stays, but we fail, or I fail.
One of our acharyas, Rupa Goswami, he made a comment once that one may be in some situation where he's not able to fully execute devotional service or to do everything properly. And he said that even that attitude is devotional service, that attitude that you want to do better. And by having that attitude that, well, I'm not quite there, Krishna, please accept me, and try and do better, gradually better will happen. And
so what are the things that you would say would be acting as a catalyst to have some, good, to propel forward quickly a little bit, so that you could be happy, or you could be a little bit more in sync or in peace? So what would be, 1 or 2 things that you might suggest that I could embark on? Because honestly, like I'm at a point where I struggle and I fail, and I believe it's just kind of at that threshold all the time.
I could share an experience with you. I've been chanting Hare Krishna since 1973, chanting 16 rounds at least every day. And I'll admit in the beginning it was a challenge, it was difficult, and I struggled to stay awake. But I had this one experience that completely and totally transformed the way I chanted japa. And that was in 1977. I was with Srila Prabhupada for his concluding pastimes in this world. And I would be in Srila Prabhupada's room every day for 8 to 14 hours a day beside Srila Prabhupada. And one day he he asked if the devotees could just chant Hare Krishna. There's some couple of devotees came in, they started doing this bhajan, and Prabhupada said, I only want japa. And I was surprised, these other devotees left, and I thought, well, if Prabhupada wants japa, I'm going to chant japa for Prabhupada. So for several days, I stayed in Srila Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada was only a few feet away from me, and I chanted the Maha Mantra on my beads from probably 6 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night for 2 or 3 days, just constantly. And it just gave me that realization that I wasn't just chanting my rounds, I was chanting this for Srila Prabhupada. And that's something that always stuck with me. And it completely transformed the way I chanted and made it so much more easy to chant, seeing that this was actually a very personal service to Srila Prabhupada and something he took satisfaction and pleasure in. And now I almost never fall asleep when I chant. And if I do, I'll immediately stand up and start walking. If I just eyes closed like one iota. So that for me, just seeing that it was something that Srila Prabhupada wanted, that even if I didn't feel like it, I'm going to do that because I know Srila Prabhupada wants that. I love Prabhupada. I want to do this to please Prabhupada. And I think if we can develop that kind of consciousness and see how these are some things that Srila Prabhupada placed such great value in, and he saw how much we could benefit from doing that. And if we can see how to dovetail our desire with Srila Prabhupada's desire, it's a kind of empowerment that comes from that can help greatly. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think yes, that's kind of true. I mean, I need to probably, I see I have to put more commitment towards it.
Prabhupada once, I can tell you another thing.
Go ahead.
I'll tell you one thing that really, it struck me very deeply once. I was reading Srila Prabhupada was talking about commitment. And he said, commitment means determination to make advancement. And then shortly after, he said, without that determination, one cannot make any tangible advancement. So when I heard him say that, I realized, well, I'm a fraud. I'm neither committed nor determined. And I realized what a tall order that is, to be determined and committed. Because he said determination means one is never frustrated or agitated by any difficulty or impediment that comes before one. So if we're getting frustrated and we see it as impediment, that's actually a little light going off on our dashboard that says, hey, you're not actually committed. You're not actually determined. And when I read that, it was like a real wake-up call for me. And another thing I heard Srila Prabhupada say once, which was also a real eye-opener, Srila Prabhupada said, he was actually questioned by a devotee. And the devotee said to Srila Prabhupada, he said, sometimes devotees, they're not happy. And Prabhupada's reply was, if he's not happy, he's not devotee. I thought, holy smokes. That's a really tall order. You gotta be happy all the time. But what it made me realize, if I'm not happy, I can't just wallow in self-pity that I'm blaming the whole world and I'm not happy and groveling in self-pity. But if I'm not happy, I have to pick myself up and get myself out of the modes and engage in activities of Krishna consciousness. And even if it's difficult, I'll be satisfied because I'll be trying to approach Krishna. So sometimes Krishna gives us these kind of indications how to fine tune our consciousness and keep the focus on the direction we want to go.
I think that's why one of the verses in this chapter, which is my favorite one, where Arjuna asks and says that mind is restless like the wind. It resonates with me as one of my favorite cues in Bhagavad Gita, and this is like my favorite verse in the Q&A. So it's amazing. Thank you again for your participation.
The wind can be blown, but we can lean into it and keep on walking.
Very good. Actually, what you're pointing out, Prabhu, is that this process is very personal. You know, like you were telling the
Yeah.
story of sitting with Prabhupada and you were chanting for Prabhupada. And if we can focus on that, on being more personal, not just a process, then it's so much. It's very, very helpful. Very helpful.
Sometimes I think about that when I'm chanting. Like if you're talking to someone and they're not paying attention, it's pretty frustrating, isn't it? You've experienced that. You're talking to someone, they're thinking about something else, and you don't feel validated, and it's like. So just imagine Krishna is everywhere, and we're chanting his name, but we're not really paying attention. So how does Krishna feel about that? Krishna's detached, but just imagine how Krishna feels if we're actually chanting to him, for him, how much he feels that. And we can reflect in that way that it's actually, it's not that we have to chant our rounds, it's that we have an opportunity every day to actually connect with Krishna through chanting. So if we can see, it's not that we have to chant or it's difficult to chant, but it's an opportunity where we can just actually be alone with Krishna, just have that really special time.
Yes. Any other questions?
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Can you listen me?
Hare Krishna. We can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Sanjeev Prabhu, actually when I started, it was really difficult for me also to concentrate my mind actually. Actually, I would do 16 rounds, but then after 16 rounds, I would think, okay, I didn't really connected with Krishna. So I sat there 16 rounds. But first of all, please keep doing it because it will connect to you to Krishna. More you talk his name, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, more you talk Mahamantra, more you will be connected. A few things that really helped me in chanting, mind will go away certainly every minute, you know, not to talk about every 16, like every round, every minute it will go away. But what I ask from Krishna is, Krishna, please keep me near to your lotus feet, give me your service and protect me. These three things I usually talk in my mind and bring my mind back. It's really helpful. Just these three verses. Please give me your service, keep me near to your lotus feet, and protect me. And another thing, just kind of beg in front of him, like you have no power in you, like you are a restless child who just want to go to his mother, like in a crying mood, like Krishna, I can't do this, help me. And it's really helpful actually. It's really helpful. And always another thing, try to listen when you are speaking Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Just listen when you are talking. So feel this way. When you're talking and you're listening to that mantra, it goes inside you. We all know we have a soul inside that is connected to Krishna. So when you listen to that mantra from your ear and that goes inside, you feel that soul is listening to that mantra and the vibrations are going to Krishna. The very simple example is right now here in Zoom. We're all sitting in India, in Sharnagati, in BC, in Alberta, but we're all connected. We're all connected through waves. We all know that, right? There is no wires in between us. So all these waves and these vibrations, if we can connect with each other, we can certainly connect with Krishna through Harinam, through Mahamantra. It's as simple as that. There is no engineering and no technology in that. So
Prabhupada was very expert at boiling things down to the absolute essence. One time a devotee, he said, Srila Prabhupada, when I chant my mind, I have a hard time with my mind. And Prabhupada's reply was, there's no question of mind. He said, just chant and hear. Simple, just most simple essence. And like we say, and like we all experience, sometimes it's very difficult. And there's a very nice example given in our Shastra of how when you have jaundice, one of the ironies of jaundice is that if you taste something sweet, it'll actually have a very distasteful taste. But one of the cures for jaundice is to actually suck on a rock sugar because it actually purifies the liver. So you have to take this medicine in the form of this rock sugar, which tastes bitter to you, but actually it is sweet. And if you keep taking that medicine of the rock sugar, eventually you'll begin to taste the sweetness. So even though we may not taste that full sweetness of the holy name, the medicine is the holy name and it is sweet. We cannot taste the sweetness because we're affected by the jaundice of the modes of ignorance and passion. And by that chanting, we become purified, and then that natural sweetness will begin to manifest within us. We'll taste that sweetness. Did Jade have a question?
Thank you.
I do have a question, but it's kind of on a totally different vein. I was just kind of wondering, because in chapter 5, it mentioned like breath control, and pranayama is often a very common yogic practice. And I'm wondering why it's not something we practice.
So Prabhupada, he actually gave us the essence. And just chanting Hare Krishna and reading the Bhagavad Gita, that's sufficient. These other processes are also there, and they can be beneficial. And I remember before joining the movement, my wife and I used to do Hatha Yoga. So every morning, without fail, when I got up, I would do this asana routine called the sun salutation, which involves different asanas standing on your head. So the first morning, we stay in the temple in Vancouver, and I immediately wake up and I'm doing these asanas and standing in my head. And one of the devotees said to me, "What are you doing? This is Maya. This is nonsense." I said, "Okay, give it up." But many years later, I was reading a book by one of the Vaishnava acharyas. I think it was Hari Bhakta Vilas, and he was describing different rituals for Vaishnavas. And one of them was to daily do this Surya Namaskara Pranam routine. So yoga, it is actually there within our Shastras. You can do these things, and it can help you to settle your mind a little bit. So those things are adjuncts. They can facilitate, but they're not the main process to develop love for Krishna. Those things can help you to maintain your health and vitality and strength of mind, which will facilitate you in your devotional service. So yeah, they can be beneficial.
Sorry, just to clarify, it doesn't create devotional feelings, so that's why it's not a main practice.
It may not. Let's put it this way. Srila Prabhupada used to say, in Krishna consciousness, we don't negate anything, but we want to add the digit 1 in front, then it has value. So even yoga, hatha yoga, if you're doing it because you want to improve your health for the service of Krishna, then you've spiritualized it. And same thing with pranayama. It can help you to clarify your mind and become more settled so you can be more healthy. And especially a lot of my generation are realizing the importance of doing things like yoga for health, which we neglected in our earlier years. So those things are, they're very much helpful. We were in Russia recently. Well, that was 2019, and there's a very nice brahmachari ashram in, I think it was Omsk, Siberia. And they were showing us the whole brahmachari program. Every morning they got up and they did yoga, and it was very interesting. They were really developing a very balanced group of young men. They were teaching them different skills so that, eventually when they left the brahmachari ashram, they'd be equipped with some skills. They were learning carpentry and mechanics and all kinds of things. So everything can be utilized in Krishna's service. So we don't want to just do those things. The goal isn't just health, but the goal is to be healthy so we can serve Krishna nicely. Then it becomes perfect.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're 4 minutes over time. It was nice to see you all.
Thank you very much, Parthapram.
I pray that someday soon we can meet in 3 dimensions. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Everybody, before you hang up, I just want to say a couple of things. as you know, in the middle of June, we were planning a retreat day. And for quite some time, it looked like it was going to be impossible to have it in Sharanagati. And now, in the past few days, I've been talking with Balakrishna Prabhu and Damodar Prabhu we've been talking about the possibility of actually doing a retreat day in Sharanagati. Even if we don't do it on the appropriate day in June, that it would be better to wait until things open up a little bit more even, so that we could actually have a coming together in Sharanagati. I mean, Zoom is wonderful. I always see Jade's beautiful smiling face, and Sanjeev is always seriously listening, and all these things are wonderful. But for everyone to get together in real time would be, I think, very, very inspiring. So we're working on that. We're working on that. And so just be a little bit patient.
Prabhu, I think after 15th of June, we all will be able to travel outside our health regions.
Right.
It might lift the restrictions up.
We don't want to exactly plan that date right now, because it may change. You know the way it's been.
Yeah.
They say date and then
They
it
extend it.
changes again. But it's not like it's a huge group. It's not a huge group. So, you know, let's just be a little bit patient here, and we'll keep you posted. And we are planning on it and want to do it in person. Okay? All right. Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Have a good week. I'll see you next week. Thank you, Partha.
Thank you.
Thank you so
you.
much.
Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
My pleasure. Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol.